So in the last class we had been looking at user input validation, and we saw that you can check the format of something to see that it looks like it should. So you can check that a phone number has the correct number of digits, you know, or that it begins with an O or an 8 and has like a 5 or 6, whatever, these things. You can check all those things. We also saw the concept of a check digit. And that's where you use the last digit as some sort of indicator as to whether everything looks okay. So you devise some elaborate mathematical scheme. You don't devise it actually so that it's hard to fake. You just devise it so that it can catch as many errors as possible. So you devise some scheme whereby the last digit will be equal to something depending on the rest of the information that's being input. We came up with a rather simple one for phone numbers to stop the beautiful people from giving out their fake phone numbers in bars. And that was to make sure that the last digit is equal to the number of even digits in the rest of the number. We also saw that in a scenario like that, for example, it can be a bit wasteful because you would have only 10% of the possible numbers that you'd have ordinarily with that length of phone number. So lots of things have check digits at the end. We saw those PPS numbers. There's a handout as well that you can download that has the details of a Spanish and DNE card and perhaps one or two others. It's interesting too, you know, when I was figuring out these classes in the past, I might have asked the German people, you know, what's the format of a German ID number, and you know, how does the checksum work on that? And they're like, well, what do you mean? And in Germany, as far as I can tell, there's no one number that would identify you to the entire federation, so to speak. So if you live in Bavaria, you might have a number for your Bavarian tax. You might have a number for the Bavarian health insurance, whatever. But there's no one number that would identify you across all of Germany. Is that correct? Any Germans in the class? I think that's the case. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, well, this is the thing. Partly because Germany is a federal structure anyway. But of course, there's more than that. Do you know what I mean? It's not entirely shocking that Germans wouldn't have, you know, a system where everybody is easily identifiable by a single number that you could track. Germans are more sensitive to the government monitoring their activities than others may be. You know, and there's just, you know, because of history there. So some of these things are even cultural. In the handout, I left it as an exercise for you to Google as to why. If you look here, for example, we said if you use that one extra digit there, it's going to be very inefficient because you're going to lose a whole range of numbers. We saw in the Finnish system, for example, that you can use, I think it was odd numbers were female and even numbers were male, something like that. The French system uses a whole digit for the sex. And you're thinking, well, that would allow you to code for 10 different sexes, you know, which doesn't really make much sense when there are only 2. So it's very interesting. You know, the French may be many things, but, you know, bad mathematicians and bad computer scientists, they're not. So there's a very interesting story as to why that's the case, but I'll leave that as an exercise for you to figure out how that came to be. So some of these things are wrapped up in their history as well. I have never found out why the check digit on the Spanish ID card. Is there any reason to that? It seems to be truly random. Have you come across it in your time? Anyone? The check digit, like in Ireland, it's kind of A is 1, B is 2, C is 3. The Spanish one, as you see in the handout, seems to be random. No. It's not random. The mess.
It's like a plus every digit.
Yeah.
And you get the module.
Yeah, I know you can. I know there's a. No, I don't mean that the check digit is decided randomly, because it wouldn't be much use. I'm just saying the mapping between the value of the letter. Like in the Irish system, the letter A will give you 1, the letter B will give you 2. The value of letter C is 3. The Spanish one, I don't know what I know what the numbers are, but I don't know what the why they're in the order they're in. But anyway, no.
Maybe it is a different value.
No, it doesn't. No, that'd be very complicated. Yeah. No. Now, so what we're going to do now is we're going to use that rather simple example of the even number of digits in the phone number, which isn't a particularly good checksum. Like, it's not a very good example of a checksum, but we're going to use it just to see how this would interact with the document object model. Okay? So we're going to put in a number. So it's going to say, how should you spend your money? We're going to put in a number, and then if the number is correct, you get sort of a happy JPG, and if the number is bad, you get sad JPG. So we're going to look at taking information from the form. We're also going to look at putting the code onto a button, and then we're going to look at the code for just the code for testing it. We've already seen, really, and then how that's going to interact with the DOM. So at this stage now, we're talking about not so much the programming side, but the connecting up with the screen. Could you make less noise there? Sorry, it's very noisy. No. Hopefully what I'm showing you is the same as what's on the website, on the blog, but the Wi-Fi is down at the moment, but it looks like the same thing. So no. So here we have extracted out a function called good number. We pass in the number into that, and that's going to come back then with either true or false. So if your checksum was more complicated, this function might be more complicated, but the rest of the program might be the same. There are places here where sometimes we'll see it here now. Oh no, I did it right. Okay, I was going to say in this case I didn't use parseInt when I should have, but I did. Okay, no. So this you've already seen up to here. This is the part then where we're looping through the number digit by digit, and we're counting up the number of even digits. Okay, so if it's 0, 2, or 4, or 6, or an 8, it's going to be an even one. So we're going to add something to our even count. And because we're counting up the number of even digits to check if it equals the last digit. No. This parseInt here is very important. What parseInt does is it takes a string, and if that string is made up of digits, then it'll convert that string to a number. So here we're saying if C equals 2. C here is a character. The character 2 and the number 2 are very different things. The problem is that a lot of time in JavaScript, it doesn't really mind so much. You can treat them as the same thing, and 9 times out of 10 you'll get away with it. That 1 time out of 10 is when you'll spend hours, the night before the assignment is due, trying to figure out what's wrong with your program. No. So here I'm taking the last digit of the phone number. I'm taking the 9th character. Remember, the first one is the 0th character. So we're taking the 9th, well, we're taking the last character, which is character number 9, because the first one is character number 0. Remember, in JavaScript, we start with 0. And I'm putting that into parseInt. I'm saying parseInt the string. This here is the string part. And then 10. Now, 10 is the number base. Now you would think, why would you not be using base 10 like? But you could pass in here, for example, you could pass in a hexadecimal color code from Java, from HTML or something, FF0000 or something for bright red. And you might want to get the integer value of that. So you pass in the string FF0000, and you might want to get whatever that is. I picked one that I couldn't possibly calculate in my head and get out that number. So that wouldn't be base 10, that would be base 16. So you can do base 8, base 10, or base 16. You can see why you might want base 8 or 16 as well as 10. Okay? If you say nothing, if you don't put in that 10, it will default to base 10, unless, and this is the killer, unless the string starts with a 0. In which case it will assume it's base 8, I think. Okay? So the default will only work provided the string doesn't start with a 0, which is like feck all use to anyone really. You know, if you're going to have a default, make it a default and go home. Okay? So you really need to put in base 10 there because, for example, in this example is a very good one. Phone numbers are always going to start with a 0. So it wouldn't treat, well, except of course, we're only putting in the last, we're only putting in one character here. So if it's only one character, it doesn't matter what base you do with it, because if it's 0, well, it'll still come back with 0 as an answer. But if you have 064, that's going to be a different number depending on what base you're in, whether it's base 8, base 10, or base 16. But of course, 0 on its own is always going to be 0. So it's not such a catastrophe here. If you didn't put it in there, it would still be okay. But as a general rule, if you're using parseInt, you say parseInt the string and then base 10. Any questions on that? ParseInt is important. You need to have parseInt in your arsenal or you'll get yourself into trouble. You see, JavaScript's very slutty with the types, you know. Is it an integer or is it a string? Ah, sure, you know, whatever. Whatever makes you happy, man, you know. And that's great, like, most of the time. Sometimes then it causes trouble. So if, yes, sir.
So is this here, is it checking for the string characters as well? Like
what this does is this counts up the number of even characters. For example, you might think, well, if you're counting the number of even digits, why don't you just use like some odd function or do a mod 2? Because these are strings. So it's like if it's 0 or 2 or 4 or 6 or 8, it's an even digit character. So we'll add 1 to the count. And then we're taking out the very, very last digit, converting that to a number, and then checking to see if that number equals the number of even digits. Now, like I said, this is just an example of a check digit as well. I mean, in the competition for check sums, you know, this would come last. I mean, it's a lousy check digit, but it's a good example of just the little programming thingies we need to do. So, if they're equal, that's good. If they're not equal, that's bad. Yeah? No? I see a few.
Equal will valid automatically be true.
If they're equal, well, if they're equal, valid won't get. That's good. That's a very good question. That's a very good question. If they're equal, valid won't get changed to false. If they're equal, doesn't mean the number's good. It just means it passed that particular test. Remember, we set it up as being okay, and then we fire tests at it, and if one of them knocks it down, just have to make sure it stays down. Okay, that's why it didn't say, you know, if they're the same, it's true. That's not quite the same thing. No, okay, I could have said if C is not equal to even count, you know. But like I said, sometimes it's easier to write down what you mean, write down the exact opposite of what you mean, and then put a not in front of it. Quite a few people got themselves into knots with the ands and the ors and the nots. You know, they wanted to say things like, I put this on the blog anyway if you want to have a look, but some people in the labs, they wanted to say things like, if it's not this, if it's not this, or not this, or not this, or not this, you know, instead of saying things like, I'm going to do it wrong anyway, it's stuck in my head already, but like, you know, have to be careful with your ands and your nots and your ors. Some people were saying ands when they meant ors, and others were saying ors when they meant ands and things. And And also, you know, if you put the not at the start, like not this or this or this or this or this is not the same as not this or not this or not this or not this or not this. Or is it? I don't know. I'm not sure actually. You know. Anyway, so it can get confusing, so you have to be careful, okay? So any more questions on that? So anyway, this function, you pass in a string and it comes back with a true or a false. So it evaluates the true or false. And just to look at the structure of a function here, say function, the name of the function, the parameters you're going to pass in. You probably just use one most of the time. Note here, no semicolon. I always put the semicolon in there and then my program doesn't work. Okay. And what I like to do, which I think is good practice, is I like to have a variable, okay, that stores what the function is going to return, and then at the very, very end, return that. You could say here, for example, return false. It's tempting to say, well, it's going to be false, so I return false. And you could do that and it would probably be fine. But I find if you've got lots of ifs and you're returning inside in the ifs, if you've missed, like if you have a bunch of if then else's and stuff and you screw that up a bit, you might find then that your function never returns anything. So what I like to do is I like to figure out what the answer is and then at the very, very end send back that answer. Some people like to send the function back as soon as they figured out what the answer is, you know, but it'll keep till the end, you know, and then you only have to do it once as well, you know. But that's just a question of style, really. You can do it any way you like. No.
Is that actually a Boolean variable or just a string?
It's a Boolean, but it's JavaScript is the answer to your question, you know. I mean, it's a Boolean variable as we know it. Internally, God knows how it's stored, you know.
Did you assign the value to it true at the beginning?
I hope I did. Did I? Oh, I did, yeah. There I did, yeah. It's the kind of thing I do is not do that much, you know. Someone said the other day, you know, it's okay because it defaults to true or whatever. Who knows?
Could you have just done var valid equals true?
No, I think you have to make sure that it's a Boolean, like.
Pretty sure you can.
Yeah, yeah. I'd say you'd want to be, you know, would you risk it, like?
When you use var, like it could be anything, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you say valid, var valid equals true, I mean, would it be the string true? Do you know?
But if it's checking, it's only, you would set it to false later or it would be true later. Whatever you use to check, it shouldn't matter.
But then if you do the test later to see if it's true, like, if has to have a Boolean. So, like, if you're saying, you know, well, it could be stored as a string. And so if the string is, if you have a string that's true, set to true, and then later you set that string to false, that's fine as long as you don't later on go and use that string as a Boolean variable as it has to be inside in the if statement. You might find yourself saying something like if valid equals true, then, just to make sure you get around that, you know, which is that. So you don't want to do that just to be on the safe side. Okay, I'm Mr. Safety Guy. Okay, you know, JavaScript will bite you in the ass unless you're careful. No. So this stuff here then is what's actually happening on the page. If we look here, we have an image tag, and we've called the thing. We've called the image. We've given it a name, spend. So, yeah. So I'm using the old style there for the. Yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. So we're giving this the name spend. Now this is interesting here. Look, we have a button. So this is a button on the bottom of the page. We're saying button type equals button. On click, check number. Okay. So when you click that button, that function called check number in the header is going to be called. So we're going to look at that now. So check number's up here. Now, check number doesn't do any of the checking of the number, ironically. It takes the number off the page, hands it off to that, what was the number of the function we called? Good number. Okay? Good number comes back with true or false, and then check number will either show like happy.src or sad.src. Okay? And change the text as well. So we have document.forms here, and then the phone number dot value. So if you look at this here, this should be all one line, by the way, one line. You see that we've called the form phone form, and then this input box here is the phone number. So this is how we talk about that text box, as you might call it in Visual Basic or something. So that text box there on the screen, that's called, this one here we're talking about, that's called the phone number. Okay? So the contents of that text box are going to go into the variable num. I set num like this, by the way, just to force it to be a string, because that's another thing. Like, if I'd put it into an integer, well, then JavaScript would have gone, okay, it's an integer, so fine. Thought it was a string, but no, if you want to be an integer, fine. Do you know? So I'm just forcing num there to be a string. And then num gets the value from that box, okay? So if it's good, this is what's going to happen. No. So this get element ID is your new best buddy, okay? Yes, sir.
That phone form there
Yeah.
is an HTML form.
Well, it's this form here on the page. Yeah, it's a HTML form. It's just only one. There's not much in it, like. But yeah, it's here. Look. Form. Like I said, it's not a very big form.
I mean, the lack of that HTML there, is this something that, I mean, as for my understanding, it should be like phone form.html.
Here is it? I don't know. I could be wrong. You can look it up. Not right now, but we can look it up. So you're saying there should be document forms, phone form, the phone number, dot HTML.
Phone form.
Right? Don't know. We can look it up. I think this will work anyway as well. No. So if the number's good, then we're going to do what's going on here. Now, I've just made this nice and big on the screen so you can see it, but these would all be on the one line, okay? Just be aware of that. They wouldn't all be on the one line, but you know what I mean. So, you can talk about stuff in the document using the document object model tree, and you can start at the start and sort of navigate your way down. But there's a shorthand where you give something an ID, you give it a name, and then just talk about things with that name. So this output text here, okay, is this div that I have here. So I've set up a div, right, and I've given it this name output text. Sorry, this ID output text. There's a difference. So that div there has an ID output text. And that's that piece of text here. Okay? And then in the code, you can talk about things then that have that ID. So you say get element by ID. So now we're talking about that div. And it's saying I want to modify some of the properties of that div. So I'm going to get the style background property of that div and set it to this, whatever that happens to be. And then we're going to same get element by ID of that div. And this is very interesting here. The inner HTML allows you to actually modify the HTML of an object, which is pretty powerful. So what I'm going to say here is, at the moment where it says, right now I know nothing, we're going to say num plus, and then looks good to me. You're familiar with this here where we're doing the happy face and the sad face and stuff like we do for the rollovers. So I'm saying new image. So I'm going to assign that to happy. I'm going to say happy.source, assign happy.jpg, and then document.spend.source equals happy.source. And spend here is the name I've given to the €5 note. If the number is bad, we use a different color and we say that number looks dodgy to me, and we say var sad equals new image, just a new image object there. I'm going to say sad.source equals sad.gif. GIFs or JPEG? Oh, GIF, all right. I used the JPEG above. Did I? Okay. And then document.spend.src equals sad.source. So if the number is good, we change the background color of the thing called output text. We change its style.background property. And the inner HTML, the actual HTML of the thing called output text, we'll get that there. Now when I say you're changing the HTML, you could actually put entire chunks of HTML in there. Image tags, links. You could even, you know, if you were really pushing the boat out, put like JavaScript in there, but then you've JavaScript writing JavaScript. I know, gets very Inception after a while. Any questions on that? Now if I'm still connected up to the network, we should see it work, but that's a big if. Let me just see there. Okay. Of course, no. The whole point is that the network isn't connected. I'm looking at this locally. Sorry, my apologies. The network is still down. So if we know a number that's dodgy, 087 1234. So if the beautiful person gives you that number in the bar, you don't rush out and book the most expensive hotel in town. You go to Extravision and rent a video and stay home. Okay. So that's the sad image there has replaced the source of spend. So the image that had the name spend, look at it there, where's it gone? See, the name of that is spend. So here we're saying document.spend.source equals sad.source. So any questions on that? So the point of today's class now wasn't the actual algorithm for checking the number. That's not worth much really. What we're interested in today is taking information off a page, passing it to some function that says whether it's good or bad, and then depending on what that comes back with, modifying the appearance of the page. And it's important to realize that this page has already been written at this stage. Once a page has been written, you don't get to use document.writes anymore. They're no good to you. So you'll be looking at buttons and modifying the page that's already there. So you have access to the attributes and the properties of the objects in the page, and you can tweak those. Yes, sir?
When you put the number, you get the check that it is coming with, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But is there a way to, when you get back whatever answer, to check it again for the page that you were given back, like the way to kind of...
This is, oh, sorry, that's a very, very, very good question. This is a very, very important point. This is the same page.
Oh.
This isn't a new page that has this in it. This is the exact same page you were on, but we've tweaked things on it. We've changed things on the page, on the fly. That's an important distinction. It's very, very important. This is the same page. It's the exact same page. You can't see the URL on top. It's the same page, but some of its properties have been modified by the code that was behind the button. Because you can see how you could do this with a new page, you know, but this is the same page.
Here the value here is false. Yeah?
Yes. So the function came back with false. So it said 08712334 looks dodgy to me. So it modified. Oh, there's no blue in this screen. Your blue, that projector there is completely missing the cyan. Completely missing it, like it's totally gone. Okay. On my screen here, there's a big blue background behind 012087 looks dodgy to me. So we modified the background color of that div. We modified the inner HTML of that div, and we modified the source of the image. Any other questions? So that example is on the notes and slides page of the blog. So we'll try and do some stuff now with something like that in the labs, okay? Obviously, you can just look at that one working and see how it works. Any other questions?
When the value is true.
When the valid is true. Can someone, what's a valid number? 087 12 34. So 1, 2, 3, 4 even digits, wasn't it? Okay. So that's what you go spend your money on, okay? You're in luck. Okay?